different elements to that. I supported the bill. It had a second reading on Tuesday night, but quite frankly, I don't agree with the basic premise of your question, which is that this is going to restrict freedoms to protest. The freedom to protest is a fundamental right, and it is protected. What we're talking about here is trying to make sure that when people do protest, they don't protest in a way which significantly impacts others who are not protesters. They're just trying to go about their job or get to work or anything like that. So what we're talking about is where we have large blockades. For example, here in Westminster, we saw blockades of the streets which stopped bus routes getting people to their hospital appointments. Well, that's not right. So this is about making sure that we can protest, but we can protest in a way which doesn't stop people getting to work or getting to a hospital appointment. So I think it's possible to achieve that balance. I think it is possible to make your point in a protest without impacting others. So what we need to strike, therefore, is that balance, and that's what the bill does. So the basic premise of your question, which is that we are stopping protest, is just simply wrong. The powers and the restrictions on protests, which have applied to mobile protests for many, many years, are now going to apply to static ones. When the legislation was drafted, the amount of the protests weren't static, but they are now. So it's now just a question of making sure that the legislation is updated. But the underlying principle of freedom of speech and freedom to protest, absolutely unchanged. I have done protest marches on post offices and on, and perhaps highly appropriate to highlight it for the county council, on the Nid Gorge Relief Road. So I'm sorry, David, you're just wrong. Protest wasn't the only part of that bill. Can I just remind you of a few things that were in that bill? It included increasing the maximum sentences for assaults on emergency workers. It brought in the police covenant to give more support to police services. It increased whole life sentences for the premeditated murder of children. It increased sentences for some of the more significant crimes that we have within our country. The amount of things that were really good in that bill were rejected by both Labour and the Liberal Democrats and Scottish nationalists. So quite frankly, why you would vote against, if you're a Liberal Democrat MP, why would you vote against increasing the sentences for some of the most violent and depraved criminals in our country? I think the Liberal Democrats have made a terrible mistake.
And so if I could just
supplementary, David.
Yeah, well, if I just respond, Chair, because I think it's disingenuous in terms of the way our MP is presenting the situation. Clearly, the vote against was not against those elements of the bill that improve protection for society. Andrew says that it isn't a change to the Act. It is a fundamental change to the Act. There are elements in there that says you cannot protest if you make a noise. You know, that wasn't in the original Act. Clearly, it is a massive change. Also, that the Home Secretary has given herself powers to be able to change and reinterpret the Act without any fundamental scrutiny. So it is a massive impact in terms of our